Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Adopting Salesforce DX. My name is Christopher Marzilli. I work in platform success here at Salesforce. I'm a certified application architect. One of the first questions I always get when I first talking to people about Salesforce DX is why now? Why are we changing the way we develop on the platform? And the truth of the matter is that our community of developer has grown significantly over the years. We're up to 4.3 million developers, and we need to put in place a more modern way to do development on the platform. Now, Salesforce has always been known as a great low-code, no-code declarative platform that's really empowered admins. With Salesforce DX, we are now looking at the professional developer and understanding how can we better help the professional developer in a programmatic sense, and using some of those key principles of modern software development that are really missing from the platform right now. And what we did is we actually talked to a lot of our developers about what they would like to have in a development lifecycle, and we came out with a number of very important kind of core statements that we want to make and be able to say about the Salesforce development platform. First, developers told us we want to drive everything from source. We want to use a version control system and drive that as our source of truth. If you understand how the Salesforce development platform works today, your source of truth is very org-centric, and it doesn't necessarily include version control unless you go out of your way to download all of the metadata and stuff it into a version control system. We also wanted to organize around team collaboration. We wanted to make the code more modular. Right now, in a Salesforce org, your code is one big monolithic code base. We want to make it more modular. We wanted to make environments that are easily created and destroyed. If you've ever worked with sandboxes, they can take quite a long time to refresh and be created. And we want to be able to create, easily spin up in environments, do what we need to do, and then destroy them and throw them away and move on to our next task. We also wanted to make tools that are based on open standards and they're easily to extend. So we want to make sure that you can use the tools that you know and love. You can use the IDE you want to use. You can use the version control system that you want to use. You can use the continuous integration tools you want to use, and we want to be able to integrate with all of them. We want tools that facilitate continuous integration and delivery. And we also want to support flexible packaging that is not just for ISVs, but both for our customers and our ISVs to help make a new distribution model. So when you take all of these core principles together, what we have now is what we call Salesforce DX, where we can build together and deliver continuously. We want to base this in a source-driven development so you have greater agility to develop and build your features and also collaborate with your team so that you can branch your code easily, spin up your org, do your work, check your code back in, and all of your teammates can go get that code. And oh, by the way, we also want you to integrate that code continuously. So as you're checking code into your version control system, a scratch or an org can be spun up and test your code to make sure you haven't broken anything. And getting that almost near real-time results of when I check my code in, I get my Apex test run, and I'll know if I broke something immediately, as opposed to be waiting days, if not weeks, for a QA person to push it into another sandbox and find out, oh, I did break something. And then we want to make sure that you can extend Salesforce DX so you can integrate it with all your tools. One of the main pieces of Salesforce DX is a command line interface. It's an executable that you can extend and also integrate with all of your other tools. So we wanted to make sure that we had tools and answers for you across your entire application lifecycle management. And it's pretty simple when you think about ALM. You plan it, you code it, you build it, you test it, and then you release it. And what we've developed is a suite of tools and integrations that's going to help you. We have this command line interface to help you with your environments and also checking your code into source control. We have a number of IDEs. We have our old Eclipse IDE, but now we're also supporting Visual Studio Code, which is a very cool IDE from our partner Microsoft. We have something now called Scratch Orgs. These are our MIFO environments that you can quickly spin up and dispose of when you're done working with them. Through our CLI, we can now integrate with all the other continuous integration vendors out there like Jenkins or Capado or AutoRabbit or whatever tools you want to use for continuous delivery and for build automations. And we also still work with our sandboxes. You can use the CLI to push and to retrieve and deploy from your sandboxes and from production. So just because we have these new type of environments called Scratch Orgs, it doesn't mean sandboxes are going away. Sandboxes are going to be critical to your success in development. And then also packaging. We want to streamline packaging. That's the one piece of this talk that I'm not going to really get into deep, because packaging is actually a newer feature that's currently in beta, and we're going to be releasing it later next year. But that's another piece to the puzzle of being able to easily move and ship your code. So when we now conceptually think about what our ALM process is, we have two ways for feature development. And what I'm showing here is a very typical ALM process on the Salesforce platform, where you have multiple developers working in some dev sandboxes. Perhaps they all push their code using change sets or the metadata API into a dev pro sandbox. Then eventually it'll move to a partial, and you'll get some QA and some UAT. Finally, a full sandbox to do any load testing or performance testing, do your final staging, and then it gets off into production. Now, with Salesforce DX, we have another method of you doing your ALM, and that's driven off your version control system, off the repo or repos that you create to house your code. You will use that repo to spin up your scratch orgs, do your development, check your code back in. Then that code can then be pushed into those sandboxes, those dev pros, your partials, your fulls, to get your testing and do your testing. And this will all come off of your version control system. First, shipping change sets from one org to another, or using the metadata API or the force.com AMP migration tool, which really the CLI now replaces. So you have different options. And again, it's not going to be an all or nothing. You can still ship code differently depending on what's best for you. So the question now is, all right, how do we get started with this new Salesforce DX thing? So the first thing you're going to want to do is one of two things. You're going to enable what we call Dev Hub in your production org. This is your main org. You just enable it. It just clicks you a box. And what that does is it allows you to download the CLI. Well, I'm sorry, you can download the CLI no matter what, but it allows you to link your CLI to your Dev Hub, and it allows you to spin up Scratch orgs. If you're not comfortable turning it on in your dev org, sign up for a trial. You can get a free 30-day trial org, and you can turn it on there, and you can play with it. But I'm going to tell you, after you start playing with it, you're going to want to be able to use it in your production org. It's not going to change your production org. It's just you have to enable it to get that. Now, once you've enabled the Dev Hub, you can then install the Salesforce CLI. And there is a ton of features in this CLI. There is no way I can cover them in this talk, but I'm going to do a quick whirlwind tour of our CLI. So the first thing I'll show is help, because I always need help. And if you do SFDX force help, you'll get all of the different top-level commands that you can run. And the first command I'm actually going to run, and I copied all my commands, so I don't have to type them, is actually create a project. So when I create a project, it's actually going to scaffold me a directory where I can then start building. This is very similar if you're using, say, the Eclipse IDE or Visual Studio. You do file, new project, and that's how you start working. So this is the very same thing. And now notice I got a number of files. One of the key files here is this JSON, this project scratch org project scratch definition JSON file. I don't have time to get into it, but this is the file that'll actually shape your scratch org. You can tell it what edition you want. You can tell it what features you want enabled. Do I want to have mobile enabled? Do I want to have multi-currency enabled? This is where you create your org shape, all right? So I'm going to go into my project directory. I called it my work. And we can see all the files. So what I'm going to do now is actually create a scratch org using that that definition file. You can say I'm going to use SFDX force org create, and I'm going to give it that configuration, and I'm going to give it a name, an alias. That's what -a is. I'm going to call it DF scratch. So this is going to take a second, and it's going to start spinning up a scratch org. Now, if you're familiar with how we do sandboxes, you probably have to call your admin and say, hey, I knew I'd do dev sandbox, and maybe a day or two later you'll hear back from them. But hopefully, if the Wi-Fi is great, we should have a scratch org very quickly. Maybe not so quickly. Man, I did this right before the session, and it happened like that, of course. As the scratch org is being spun up, what we'll also take a look at is how you can then open and get into that scratch org and start playing in that scratch org, and you can actually pull down the metadata from that scratch org to your local machine. The demo gods are not being nice to me today. All right, I think I'm dead on the Wi-Fi here. No, I'm still on it. All right, we'll skip that and we'll talk through some of the commands. Oops. Did that come on? All right. So what I would have done, if it worked, after I did my force org create, I'd actually work on, I'd open up my org, and I can do that with the force org open command. And then we could do something in the org, and we could do, if you notice, there's a force source commands, and you can do force source pull. And you can pull down any changes. So if I'd added a custom field, which is what I plan to do, I could pull down that metadata change. I could also create an Apex class on my local machine and do a force source push. I could push that to that. And then I can also, if I'm not sure what I've changed, I can do a force source status. And that will actually tell me if I have things in my Scratch org that are not local, and if I have things local that are not in my Scratch org. Once you sync the two to your local directory, you can then check it into any version control system you want. And that's really the power there, because it's on your local directory. It can be integrated with Git or GitHub, Bitbucket, or any other tool that you're looking for, and you can simply check it in to all of your, to any version control system. So to adopt Salesforce DX, it is not an all or nothing thing. There's a lot of other commands that I actually didn't even talk about, like you could look at your limits. You have force limits. You also have another cool one called force data. This will actually allow you to export and import data that's related, so you can build test data, which is really important. I know that I talk to a lot of developers and like, how do I get test data in my dev orgs? This is a tool that will actually export data for you in a JSON format. You can then check that JSON into your version control system and share it with your developers. And what's even better about all of this is that all the commands that you can use, because this is an executable CLI, you can script it, right? So you can have one command scripted to spin up your Scratch org, get the source code, branch your source code, push the source code up to your Scratch org, push your test, grab your test data, push your test data in, and then you're ready to go in just a few minutes. So, there's a lot of different functions of the CLI that you can adopt. One of them is simply just moving around your metadata and leveraging both the force source push and pull, and also leveraging the metadata API. If you're familiar with our Ant force.com migration tool, that's just the tool that helps you leverage the metadata API. The CLI has almost all the same capabilities, and we're working on basically having all of the same capabilities. And then, you can decide to use this as a way to drive your source control system. So using the CLI to download your source and check that, download your metadata and check that into a source control system, and then you can deploy from that. Also, you can use it for continuous integration. Tools like Jenkins can take in our CLI, or Travis CI, can take in our CLI as an executable and start doing continuous integration tasks. Like I said, what we've set up is so that when a developer checks in a piece of code, it spins up a separate Scratch org with all the other check-ins and runs all of my Apex tests, so I know if I broke something. And then, of course, you can leverage Scratch orgs. This is one of the most exciting features of DX, is being able to have these Scratch orgs that you can spin up quickly and then dispose of them. By the way, they do have expiration dates, unlike sandboxes, which you create and they sit out there forever and no one even remembers why you created them or what development work was being done on them. With the Scratch org, it defaults to 7 days, but you can have up to 30 days. And the idea behind it is that you really just use it to do the dev work, and then you check it into your version control system. So the Scratch org is pretty much meaningless at that point once you have the code checked in, and you can destroy it and move on to your next task. And then the last piece is going to be packaging. And this is the piece that's coming in the future. So this is the forward-looking statement. And we want to reimagine our packaging. If you're familiar with our packaging currently, it was really more geared towards ISVs, but now packaging is going to be for everybody. And what you're going to be able to do with this reimagined packaging is start thinking about how you can modularize your code. Right now, in your org, you have a big monolithic code base of just everything. All of your metadata, all of your Apex classes, all of your Lightning components and your Visual Force pages are just all there, basically, in the root directory. What you'll be able to do with new packaging is start taking your code and packaging them together in logical groups. You might want to do it by app, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud. You might want to do it by separating your metadata, your schema versus your code. You might want to do it by business unit, if you have multiple business units using the system. You might want to say, hey, I have some common metadata that runs across my applications. I'm going to create a common package or a utilities package that I'll base my other packages on. So there's no right or wrong way here, but you need to start thinking about, man, I'm going to be able to break up my code into different packages, and then when I do my work and I push source to a scratch org, I can just say, hey, I'm going to work on package A today. I don't need all the other stuff. And currently, the first question I always get when I talk about packaging is, can I have dependent packages? And that's something we're working on in the future. It most likely won't be in the very first release of packaging, but we'll be able to eventually have dependencies where you can say, hey, package A that I'm working on, I have that common package. It's dependent on that. So when I install package A, I'll also get the common package as well. So you'll have some really great options around how to modularize your code that you really should start thinking through now. Like, how would you break it up, based upon how your org shape is now. All right, with a few minutes left, I want to talk about some additional resources for you that are really kind of critical to you learning about DX. And really, since DX is the way we're going in development, for developers, even if you're not going to use it today, it behooves you to learn it now. All right, so these are the 4 trails that are pretty much must-take trails for Salesforce DX if you're a developer and you want to start adopting. The first one is the Salesforce DX development model. And this just kind of goes over a lot of what I talked about today, but a little bit in more detail. The second one is app development with Salesforce DX. This is where you're really going to get hands-on with the CLI and learn about all the different commands that you have and how to push and pull and work with your source, and also work with your scratch orgs and your sandboxes in production. The next one is the coolest one, all right? And this is continuous integration using Salesforce DX. You will sign up for a free GitHub account. You will sign up for a free Travis CI account. If you're not familiar with Travis CI, it is a cloud-based continuous integration tool. They're a partner of ours, and they're a partner of GitHub, and it all runs in the cloud, so you don't need to install anything. And in this trail, you will set up the exact scenario that I've already talked about. You will take some source code. You will clone a repository. You will branch that repository. You will make a change. You will branch the repository, you will download the repository, you will push it up to your scratch org, you will make a change, any change, it doesn't matter. You will then check that change in. And as soon as you check that change in, you'll go over to the Travis CI page and you'll see it start working. And what it's doing is that it's running a continuous integration script. It's building up a scratch org. It's pushing the source with your change to that scratch org. It's running all of the Apex tests, and then it's going to give you a result. And that happens in literally a matter of minutes. And you can think about how easy that is. And then it deletes the scratch org, so it doesn't count against your limits. It's an extremely powerful trail, and even if you don't use Travis CI, it doesn't really matter because it shows you how to go about the process of setting up continuous integration. And honestly, it'll only take you a couple hours, and you'll have pretty much a great view of what the future is going to look like for Salesforce development. And then the last trail, this is actually one of our first partner ever modules where we worked with Git and GitHub to do a Git and GitHub basics trail. I'm actually a Subversion guy. When I was coding, I used Subversion a lot. I didn't know a lot about Git. This is a great primer to get you started with Git if that's the version control system you want to use. And again, you don't have to use it. If you want to use something else, our whole point is that we can be open and we want to integrate. But Git and GitHub seem to be some of the industry standards. So we have this partner module that you can take and learn a little bit more about Git, and then also how it works with Salesforce and the Salesforce DX and the Salesforce CLI. So these are must-take trails. If you do one thing when you leave Dreamforce, make sure you guys take these trails. All right. So with that, I'm just about out of time. I'll be happy to take questions if you want to come over. I'll hang out over here for a little bit. But I just wanted to remind you, my name is Chris Marzilli. There's my Twitter up there, @cmarzilli.com. Feel free to tweet me any of my questions. If you guys think about something late tonight, feel free to tweet me. I won't answer you until I wake up in the morning, but hey, I will try to answer you. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of Dreamforce.